It's week 7, and let's be honest, the bye week this week really kind of sucks. A lot of very valuable players are out this week. But to help you prepare for the bye apocalypse, I do have my IDP rankings set and ready to roll for you, and we're going to get to those right now. Now, I do have the scoring format that these rankings are correlated to listed above me, so feel free to check those out if you have any questions. It is just Fantasy Pros standard IDP scoring. But with that said, let's roll right into the defensive lineman rankings. So as you can see, I have Matt Judon going against the New York Jets, listed at number 1 this week. The New York Jets are just a prime matchup for the defensive linemen. That offensive line has allowed the second most sacks per game, along with Zach Wilson's very high time to throw statistic. Then you add in the amount of pass to run plays that they run, and it's a very easy matchup to choose Matt Judon in, especially when he's been lighting it up already this season. Moving on to Hassan Reddick at number 2, doesn't have as good of a matchup going against New York, but just hard to bench a guy who's pretty much registered a sack in every single game and really hasn't done you dirty at all yet this season. Daniel Jones has been very prone to turning the ball over, whether it be fumbles, interceptions. So I think there's a very decent likelihood that Hassan Reddick could even get a sack along with a strip sack, something to that nature this weekend. Then we have my boy Harold Landry coming in at number 3 versus Kansas City. Really not a great matchup. In this situation, I'm purely siding with the talent of the player and what he's done so far this season. But with what he's done, I just think you can really trust him in your lineup. I have him at number 3, but anywhere in the top 10 I think is pretty fair to me. Shaq Barrett going against Chicago and Justin Fields. Justin Fields, another very high time to throw percentage. Whether he's second guessing his reads or just taking that much time to throw, it'll give Shaq Barrett that much more time to track him down and take him down for the sack. Also, Justin Fields hasn't been too safe with the ball yet this year. He's still a developing quarterback. I love him as a prospect. I think he's going to figure it out, but I just don't think it's going to happen this year or probably under Matt Nagy. Nick Bosa at number 5, fresh and coming off the bye against Indianapolis. Not a great matchup, not a terrible one either. Indianapolis is kind of in the middle of the row when it comes to sacks allowed per game, as well as Carson Wentz kind of being in the middle when it comes to that time to throw statistic. And they like to run a little more than they pass, so it just leaves a little bit less opportunity for Nick Bosa to show up. But he's one of those players that, again, you're kind of siding with the talent more than anything on the upside of the play. Now, this is pretty high, probably the highest I've had Leonard Floyd ranked all year so far. Leonard Floyd going against Detroit, one of the better matchups this week for defensive linemen. Detroit has a pretty banged up offensive line. They've done a pretty good job keeping Jared Goff off the ground for the most part. However, with how bad the Detroit defense is, I really see this game getting out to a shootout quick. Detroit is going to have to throw to catch up. That's just going to leave Jared Goff basically up on a platter for this defensive line to just eat him alive. So if you ask me, if you have anybody on the Los Angeles Rams defensive line, fire them up this week with confidence. And I think more than likely you'll be pretty satisfied with the result. Myles Garrett going against Denver on Thursday night. This is probably just going to be one of the most gross matchups of the week just because of the sheer amount of players that are out for Cleveland. It's going to be an ugly game. It should be an easy Denver win. God knows you never know in the NFL. But Denver does match up pretty well for the defensive lineman. Myles Garrett is a stud. He usually does pretty well in those good plus matchups and usually does well to a staggeringly good extent. So I say if you have Myles Garrett on your team, fire him up, I think, with some amount of confidence this week. I know he's usually kind of a boomer bust option, but this week I think he might be one of the lone bright spots for Cleveland. Khalil Mack has been a pretty solid option this year, kind of revitalizing his career to some extent. Not reaching those high highs like we used to see when he was a DL1, highly regarded, but he's still doing some damage this season going against Tampa Bay and Tom Brady. Not a great matchup, but it's one of those where, I think Khalil Mack can get the edge on Tom at least once in this game. But moving on to a player that has a great matchup this week, Von Miller has, kind of had an up and down start to the season. Started off real hot, kind of cooled off over the last couple weeks. But going against a beaten and battered Cleveland offense, no Baker, no offensive lineman to speak of. This is just going to be a rough shot matchup for Case Keenum to try to quarterback in and do something with, but I don't see it happening. I think Von Miller is going to eat. I think there's a good chance that he comes away with 2 or more sacks in this game. Similar to how Cleveland absolutely ate and destroyed Justin Fields, I think they're going to get their just desserts in this game. Similar to, like I said, with Leonard Floyd, Aaron Donald going against Detroit. They do have good interior presence on that offensive line, but Aaron Donald is just a dude. He's still a guy, and I see him getting his fair share this weekend. Max Crosby showed quite a bit of life last week in a plus matchup. Gets another plus matchup against Philly this week. Still a pretty bad offensive line. I do believe he'll be going against Jordan Mailata, who is their better offensive lineman. So there is a bit of a chance he struggles, but I do like the matchup in general, so I think there's a chance he shows up and does well. Javon Hargrave has been one of the bright spots for the Philly defense this week, coming in at number 12 on the defensive lineman rankings, going against Las Vegas, who has been, not great by any stretch of the imagination this season when it comes to defending against sacks and letting people get into the backfield to force pressure on Derek Carr. The weakest link in the line has been by far Alex Leatherwood, the right tackle, but if they give him any help trying to block whatever edge rushers coming off the side for Philly, Javon Hargrave is just going to have his way in the middle. Then the rest of these guys have a pretty solid matchup as well. Leonard Williams at 13, Marcus Golden at 14. Robert Quinn is questionable. He's on the COVID list right now, so he's actually probably going to be significantly lower on my rankings, or if not on them at all. But then we have Kenny Clark, who I believe might also be questionable. Then we have Brian Burns going against New York as well. Christian Wilkins going against Atlanta. That center of the line has been the weakest part for them this season. Trey Hendrickson going against Baltimore. Sebastian Joseph Day, another Los Angeles Ram defensive lineman. Montez Sweat at 21 going against Green Bay. Austin Johnson going against Carolina. At 23, we have Jeffrey Simmons going against Kansas City. Then at 24, to kind of wrap things up, would be Odafe Owe going against Cincinnati. And then chilling at 25, we have Chase Young going against Green Bay as well. Green Bay, for me being a Packer fan, I could see them really losing this matchup with this defensive line. They've had issues with them in the past, even before Chase Young was on the team. I have nightmares of a few years back, Jonathan Allen just absolutely wrecking, and I mean wrecking, this offensive line. Still waiting to hear if David Bakhtiari is ready to make his season debut. If Chase Young is matched up against a healthy Elton Jenkins, I'll feel okay, but I'm really not going to feel good about Montez Sweat going against Billy Turner on the other side. But that is it for the defensive linemen, and now on to the linebackers. But this week, coming in at number 1, we have Bobby Wagner. Looking to beat his personal best tackling record for the season. He's well on his way to doing that. Aging like a fine wine, still absolutely a dude out there. He's going to have to tackle Alvin Kamara all day long. So fire him up with confidence. I know he picked up a knee injury last week, I believe, but he played through it this past week and did just fine for your fantasy team. So I have no real concerns with that going forward. Moving on to number 2, another guy who's been kind of a pleasant surprise for Las Vegas this season has been Denzel Perriman going against Philly. Pretty decent matchup, but I think he's one of those guys that the matchup really doesn't matter. He's been a stud week in, week out. So fire him up if you got him, and I think you'll be pretty pleased regardless of the outcome. Darius Leonard coming up at number 3 against San Fran. Just one of those guys. I think, he's pretty much in your lineups regardless. There's no sitting Darius Leonard now. I mean, he's back, he's healthy, he's ready to rock and roll. So not too worried about him going forward. Then we got Roquan Smith going against Tampa Bay. Going to be asked to tackle Leonard Fournette all of the time because, Ronald Jones doesn't get any work anymore. At number 5, we got Logan Wilson, who's been just the absolute stud of the season. The sophomore breakout, just an absolute dude. Should be a guy that's chilling in your top 5 and definitely in your lineups if you got him. Cole Holcomb going against Green Bay at number 6. And, similar story here, kind of been a pretty solid piece. Everyone was expecting, Jamin Davis to be the guy, be the story in town. And while Jamin Davis had a better week last week, Cole Holcomb was still the dude showing up and showing out. Then we got some defensive linemen, linebacker eligible guys mixed in here. Just going to skip over those guys because we already talked about them previously. Coming in at number 9, we have Jordan Brooks. Similar story to Bobby Wagner. Both of these guys have just been awesome on that defense, racking up tackles. He's been a bit of a sophomore breakout as well. Moving on to the next linebacker, that's Alex Singleton, who seems to have reclaimed his role as the Philly linebacker to roster in all formats. Then we have Jordan Hicks at number 12. His fended off Zaven Collins all year long has been kind of what he's been the last couple of years. Even seems to be eating into Isaiah Simmons' workload. Isaiah Simmons kind of feels like he's that Patrick Queen mold almost, where he's either up or down, and there's no real in between, which, if I'm being honest, really isn't all that great. Moving on to 13, Devondre Campbell. I am still interested to see how Jalen Smith gets worked more and more into the Green Bay Packers defense. Watching the game, he got his first actual reps last week, and I'll just say, I'm not overly impressed. Don't get me wrong, I think he still has a lot in the tank, and I think he can be useful for a team, but he just looks like that guy out there that's just trying way too damn hard, overplaying assignments and, things of that nature, where he's just actually hurting you. I just wish coach would walk over to him and be like, hey dude, chill out. This is your assignment. Just do that and you'll be good. Sorry, another tangent over. Moving on to 14, Christian Kirksey, who I'm actually going to move up over Devondre Campbell and maybe up even a little more as we move on this list. Who knows? I'll think about it. But Christian Kirksey has been, the guy we wanted Zach Cunningham to be. I don't know what Zach Cunningham did. I think his PFF grades were pretty low over the last season and the start of this season. I also know I think there was some altercations with the defensive coaching staff that led to him kind of being demoted out of a role. Whether or not any of that's true, I can't really confirm. I don't have the PFF stats in front of me or anything like that. I don't have confirmation that, these are just whispers I'm hearing or things I've seen on Twitter that like, hey, this guy is kind of in the doghouse. So he got switched to a much lesser role. He's only in on about 20 to 30% of the snaps, I think, right now. So Christian Kirksey's absolutely the linebacker to roster. He's been Christian Kirksey of old. He's what we wanted him to be when he was on the Packers, but now he's just doing it in Houston on that pretty piss poor defense. One of the lone bright spots on that defense, if you ask me. But moving along to number 15, that's Isaiah Simmons. As we mentioned earlier, just kind of seems to might be in that boomer bust mold. Who knows if that continues? But I do think as long as Jordan Hicks is there, and then, eventually more than likely Zaven Collins is there, I do think he's still going to be that same kind of mold where I think he's a much better player than like the Patrick Queen. But like Patrick Queen's PFF stats are just horrid. Like every week his grades are just terrible. So it's one of those things where we're just not really seeing like how bad he actually is according to PFF. And you can hate PFF or not. I don't care. I think they do some things well, and I do think they do things just not great. But the fact of the matter is, the people with these low grades very rarely stay on teams. Like, so there has to be some rhyme or reason to why they're doing this and why it's effective to such a degree. Moving on to Bobby Okereke at number 16, going in San Fran. They like to run a fair amount. I do believe Jimmy Garoppolo is supposed to be back in the lineup as of now, but if not, it's definitely going to be Trey Lance. We'll see what happens. Bobby Okereke has been pretty solid coming into, now that Anthony Walker's out of town. He's been a pretty solid force. Here I am moving people around again. So I moved Quincy Williams up to number 14, linebacker on the New York Jets. A guy who, since he's gotten a more of a full-time role, has done really well on that linebacker duo. There are rumors that once Jarrad Davis is back in the mix, that they'll be back to splitting time and either will be really valuable. I hope that's not the case. You'd think with how well Quincy Williams has played and performed in this role, you would think that he's just going to have the role all to himself. He's been fine. He hasn't been hurt. He's been good to go. So I would like to think that he maintains the role, but, NFL coaches seem to like to think that they know more than we do. But I'm sure there's a rhyme or reason. But Quincy Williams, for me, right now, going against New England this week, is a pretty dang solid matchup. He hasn't let anybody down yet, really. Then moving on, we have Corey Littleton chilling at 18. Tay Crowder with a pretty decent matchup against Carolina. Kenny Young, who seemed to take back most of the snap share again last week from Troy Reeder. So I'd say whatever concerns I had there about Reeder maybe getting in the work, who knows, those seem to have faded. But I do know that Ernest Jones actually got work too. So keep an eye out for him. Then we got Oluokun going against Miami, chilling at 22. Nick Bolton at 23, going against Tennessee. This is going to be an interesting matchup because Nick Bolton is a guy who really likes to try to knock people out when he takes his hits. And I think him going against Derrick Henry will be interesting to say the least, because I think more often than not, Nick Bolton is probably going to get put on his butt. But I still want to see it happen. I still want to see these two go at it. I think it'll be a pretty interesting matchup, a good matchup for Nick Bolton. Then lastly, we'll touch on David Long going against Kansas City. Not as good of a matchup as he's had the last couple weeks, but still, Kansas City's going to try to run the ball with Darrell Williams. They're going to do their thing. They're going to run the ball at least a little bit. David Long is going to have plenty of opportunities to make tackles. It's just, and he's been the tackling force on that defensive team aside from Harold Landry. It's been pretty much the David Long tackle show. But that is kind of it for the linebacker rankings. I'll scroll through here just to kind of give you a look at some guys who are a little lower right now that aren't in that top 24. I just moved Devin White up to 25 just for the sake of having him up there because, honestly, like some of these guys just haven't performed this year, and that's just the cruel nature of the beast. We can say like, oh, Zach Cunningham, I discussed him already kind of at length. Guys like Devin White, who just, he had the most prime matchup of the year last week, and he still just didn't perform. No Levante David, Philly hasn't been a great matchup. They haven't allowed much room for linebackers to do a whole heck of a lot with their lack of even trying to use the run game. But like you would think that in that game, on a Thursday night game, when the lights come on, the stars come out, and he just was an absolute no-show. I wish I knew exactly what the deal is. I don't know if it's just the scheming is different this year, even though they have the same, everybody's the same. So I don't know what the deal is. I don't know why he's just so not effective this year, but it is what it is, at the end of the day. But that is it for the linebackers. And now we are going to move right on to the defensive backs. But it's a pretty rough show for the DBs this week. I actually have Von Bell chilling at my number 1 defensive back. And, I felt pretty crazy about it, but Baltimore lends a pretty solid matchup to strong safeties, especially box safeties. So for Von Bell this week, I could very easily see him cracking a top position. Budda Baker chilling at number 2, going against Houston. Kevin Byard going against Kansas City. Kansas City loves to throw it deep, loves to push the ball downfield as much as they can. Kevin Byard's actually been having a pretty darn good season. And at number 4, we have Jonathan Abram. I know my buddy Jake will be very happy to see him chilling at number 4. Trust me, it's just because of the matchup and the fact that a lot of the good defensive backs are out this week. But Jonathan Abram getting a pretty friendly ranking from me this week. Moving on to number 5, Jalen Ramsey going against Detroit. Detroit is just, kind of a prime pickings matchup for all defensive backs, especially a guy like Ramsey, who I would not be surprised to come away with an interception in this game. He's going to be very easily matched up against, I would guess he'll probably actually match up against TJ Hockenson, if I had to guess. Seeing that is their best offensive weapon, I could see it. It's a little bit of a mismatch, size-wise, but Jalen Ramsey's just so dang good and so dang handsy that I could see him finding a way to win that matchup one way or another. Another Los Angeles Ram defensive back, Taylor Rapp, chilling, going against Detroit at number 6. Kyle Duggar going against the Jets. Kyle Duggar's been having a pretty solid sophomore season, one of those kind of sophomore breakouts, if you will. Just looking for him to build on the momentum so far this season going against the Jets. You never know what's going to happen against that team. They love to turn the ball over. So Kyle Duggar, especially in a tough week like this with buys, that, he should be more than likely in your lineups if you have him rostered. And we have Quandre Diggs chilling at number 8, who I still don't think really gets a lot of love for how well he's played so far this season. Not a great matchup against New Orleans, but another one of those guys that I'm just kind of siding with the talent and how he's performed so far this season. Jordan Fuller, another Los Angeles Ram defensive back going against Detroit. I think I have probably a few too many in the top 10. I'm probably going to adjust that a little bit. But Jordan Fuller, kind of another guy who I've touched on in the past, is just kind of that peak and valley type of guy who he's either having a really good game or he's usually leaving you wanting more, which is okay, but you have to kind of factor that into how your team build is. Like, honestly, he would be a great player to put alongside Taylor Rapp in a lineup. Like, they're on the same team, but they're both that different spectrum of player, where Taylor Rapp is usually pretty consistent, aside from last week where he only had the 1 tackle. So that you have that steady, consistent player, and then you have that other player that alongside him that is kind of going up and down, but kind of giving you that range of upside that you need to kind of win your week from time to time. Enough talking about Los Angeles Ram defensive backs. We're going to talk about Adrian Amos going against Washington. Amos quietly having a pretty solid year this year, if you ask me. As a Packer fan, it's pretty nice to see, but going against Washington, not an awesome matchup, but again, kind of siding with the talent and what he's done so far this season. Jamal Adams has been a little better, still not having a great year by any means, not the type of season that we really wanted out of him so far, but it is what it is at this point, and we got to kind of hope that he bounces back. Last week had a really rough looking play where he just had a ball essentially go right to him and he just dinged it right off his helmet like he never saw it. So tough look there, but we gotta do with what we have and what he's done this year. So moving on to Kari Willis, who has been an absolute stud this season, especially when he's healthy. I'm even going to bump him over Jamal Adams right now. But absolutely having a bit of a breakout season, really contributing in tackles, has had a few big plays here and there. But just a guy that you definitely want on your teams. If he's out on your waiver wire, you never know. He's still really relatively unrostered on Sleeper, so definitely give him a look if you're on the Sleeper platform or any other platform. Then we have Justin Reed at 13. Going against Arizona, another pretty solid matchup if you ask me. Arizona likes to throw the ball deep. They like to run, everything you want for a safety who he plays more of a free than a strong, but it's still a pretty solid matchup for him. They like to throw the ball. They like to throw the ball deep. They're a pretty high-powered offense who's on the field for a ton of plays. And this is a game where I think Arizona is just going to run away with pretty quickly. So I think Justin Reed's going to have ample opportunity for a lot of plays to make plays. And at 15, we have DJ Reed, 16, JC Jackson, 17, Logan Ryan, who's a little lower solely because he started off real hot this season and he's kind of mellowed out a little bit. Then we have Tyrann Mathieu chilling at 18, Jarius Sneed, his teammate, going against Tennessee as well, chilling at 19, Chuck Clark at 20, Kenny Moore at 21, Xavier McKinney at 22, Justin Simmons at 23, Jesse Bates at 24, and my boy Jeremy Chin at 25. I do highly recommend that you check out the waiver wire video playlist right there and get all the studs that you possibly can on your team to help you through injuries and bye weeks. You never know what's out on your wire, and it's always worth a check. I do hope this was helpful for setting your lineups this week. If it was, please let me know down in the comments below. If you want to see my full up-to-date rankings throughout the week, feel free to go over to fantasy6pack.net. The link to that will be in the description box below. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, comment down below. I will see y'all in the next video, but until then, y'all have a good one.